So hello and welcome. So we're filming on the 1st of March, which I heard the weather forecast chap said last night that is the meteorological beginning of spring, whereas the spring equinox, I think, is at 21st of March. So we're officially spring, and to celebrate, it's raining here. So it's not very good. And also the 1st of March is St. David's Day, which brings us on to the theme of today's flower class, which was, I sort of loosely called A Host of Golden Daffodils. I can remember when I was in the Brownies, we had to learn the Wordsworth poem, and my line was, "And a host of golden daffodils." And spoiler alert, I have got some daffodils with me today, but I have mainly got pink flowers. And the other reason I chose the theme to be daffodils was it's also Shrove Tuesday today, so it's Pancake Day. And I thought if we were arranging flowers in shades of yellow, that wouldn't be quite nice to give a nod to Pancake Day and perhaps have some cut lemons in your arrangement as well, which I haven't got. So I've had this fantastic idea, and it's all gone wrong. Not so much wrong. I've readapted what we're going to be doing. So before we get on to what we're doing today, let's talk about last week's flowers. So because I used silk flowers in my little hay bale for my table arrangement, the arrangement still looks nice and healthy, and I have got some roses in there and they are just drying in situ. So I think the message I got back from those of you who joined in the class was it was quite a good project. Perhaps you were nervous to start, but you were mostly worried whether you'd got the right kind of hay. So I know some of you had hay like I had, animal hay. Some of you used sort of a bedding straw hay. Some of you actually had straw. But I think the upshot is it doesn't really matter what material you used to create this outer edge to your container. It's the technique you use to bind the loose materials together and cover up your water source in the middle of your the structure that you made. And we did talk about in class last week that you could also use sisal, which is the coconut husk. It looks like candy floss. It's sort of fibres that come in all sorts of different colours. And I do know that certainly a few years ago, my flower club, using sisal was a really, really popular material. So I hope you've tackled that one okay. And if you're catching up, do post me a photograph, either in the Facebook group or you can tag me on Instagram at flowerstart with an underscore at the end. And I will have a look and see what you've been up to. So I'm going to put that one to one side. And then just talk a little bit about what we're doing next week. So next week, I think I've called the class a flower caterpillar. We are going ultra modern. So I've tried to sort of include everybody's wants and needs to the class. We've gone from very traditional flower arranging to some more modern techniques. Some of the arrangements I've been using flower foam, and there are foam-free alternatives. Next week, there is not a piece of flower foam in sight. It's a very modern European style design, which is based around wire work. So you will need a really sturdy wire as the base for your arrangement. Now, I have got these wires I picked up from a wholesaler many years ago, and I think probably they're about a 1.2mm wire. That is really, really quite thick. It's likely that you haven't got access to these. So if for your base of your arrangement, your structure that we'll be making next week, I'm thinking the nearest thing you could do without spending a fortune on your wires is to cut up a wire coat hanger, dry cleaning hanger, take off the hook at the top, and depending on how big you wanted to make the structure, you could either straighten out the side arms of your hanger, or you could just cut it, that straight bit that you've got at the bottom, and just discard the triangular bit. So you will need a sturdy pair of pliers stroke wire cutters to do that. And then we're going to create these little spikes. I'm trying not to be rude, but 2 fingers up. We're going to be creating lots of spikes that sit either side of that wire, and that's why I say it's going to be a wire caterpillar. And we're going to be binding them on, and hopefully they will stay upright. So next week, it's going to be quite hard on your hands, and if you find it difficult to twist wires, You might want to get a friend to help you or a family member behind the scenes, but you might also perhaps want to have a glue gun to hand. So instead of relying on you twisting and shaping the wires to get them to hold up in place, you could hot glue them in place, and that hopefully will save any problems if you have difficulties with your fingers or your wrist action as well. So the wires that we're going to use for the uprights are basically any wire you can find. So I've got some green wires. These are the wires that got the green plastic coating on them. These are probably I don't know if they're a 0.90 or a 0.71. I just grabbed them out of my cupboard. So these have got the green coating on them. If you want to add extra textural interest and you have the wires that don't have that green coating on, they would be really handy to use. Please don't go out and buy any specially though, because you don't want to waste your money and effort going to buy something else. But I'm going to try and look through my wire box and see whether I can choose what selection of wires I've got that haven't got that green plasticky coating on. And the only reason I'm doing that is because I want it to look super stylish and trendy. I'm thinking I wouldn't even mind if some of my wires were quite old, and you know how they go rusty. That's the purpose of the plasticky green coating, is to stop them going rusty. But perhaps you've got some that can, you know, you're almost thinking about, I'm going to put these in the bin because they're so, you know, they're turning and they're going a bit rusty. But that rustiness is going to add some lovely texture to the arrangement. And then in terms of how thick, what gauge wire you want to use, you want something that's going to stand up and hold itself under its own weight. So for instance, if you had rose wires, the silver wires that you use to wire up roses or tiny leaves, they're probably going to be a little bit too floppy. A 56 wire might be a little bit floppy. I would say, if you can, 71s and 90s are going to do the job. And a spoiler alert, we're going to spend a lot of the time doing this, wrapping one wire around the other and getting them to stick upright. But imagine that done, and look, immediately it's flopped over. Imagine that done down the sides. So you may well find that that short section of wire from the bottom of your coat hanger is going to be about the right size. Otherwise it's going to take you forever to arrange, to put together. And then adding fresh flowers in. Now, perhaps next week, I feel this week I've gone quite heavy on my flowers, so I've blown the budget really, and that's because probably next week I might not use any flowers, and if I do, there might be just occasional stems that I've picked out from the hedgerow or picked out from my garden. And in order to get them to live, we need a water source. We're not going to be using flower foam, but we can use, number one, if you use dried materials, you could just, a bit like, imagine you've got a hedgehog and it gets caught in the undergrowth and it's got feathers stuck in its spikes. You could do that just with your dried materials and just lodge them between your wires. But if you do want to use fresh flower materials, they will have to have a water source. And this is where I'm suggesting that test tubes might come in handy. So those of you who've been following along with class for a while, we have used test tubes before, so it may well be that you've got some in your stash. These are glass. If you're going to buy them, I think probably online is probably going to be the only place you're going to source them, unless you have access to a wholesaler. Just be aware of what you're buying, because they come in different sizes. So it doesn't matter what size you use. Don't go too big though. But it's just that awareness. When you open the package, just make sure you don't have that air of disappointment because you've discovered you've bought tiny test tubes and you wanted them a little bit bigger. So I've used these for something else, and I've tied a bit of paper covered wire around them. But that is the size of test tube I've got. It's approximately the size of my forefinger, little finger, and I do have some slightly bigger ones as well. And that must be the sort of finger to thumb size on there. And we're going to, once you've got your prickly spine of wires, your caterpillar of wires, we'll then be attaching the test tubes into the wires, and that's what's going to hold your flowers. So it's going to be a testing your skills really, and we talk a lot about making beautiful harmonious arrangements when we come to class, but this one is going to be a feat of engineering really, and it's going to be the balance aspect, which is very important in our arrangements. equally, you know, the balance of how pleasing your arrangement looks, but also the balance in terms of, is your little caterpillar going to sit square on your table? And I think probably that will be one of the more challenging aspects of this design. We could think about snaking our wires around a bit once we've added all the wires, and I say glue gun at the side, because I think that might be your best friend, just to hold everything in place. I'm being asked whether you can use Oasis tubes. I'm guessing you mean by that the plastic tubes that you might get if you've, getting a nod there. If you've ever bought orchids or anthuriums, they come on a plastic tube. That is perfectly fine to use. The only difference being the plastic tube, they're not see-through, and again, that doesn't really matter at all, but it's just a clear glass tube. It's just nice and lightweight and invisible. And the plastic tubes that you get, you know, that you've saved from the cut flowers you've bought, are just a little bit cloudy. No problem with that at all. Just embrace it, and if you don't like the cloudiness of them, an option would be to cover them up with flower tape, you know, the buttonhole tape you'd use, whether you choose the green tape or the brown, and just sort of get them to hide, really, because the plastic tubes are very much the mechanic, but they're not particularly attractive, whereas the glass test tube is the mechanic, and it is a sort of design element as well. So I will add the usual handout to the video when I send it out today. And any questions, if you're stuck or, you know, scared or don't know what to do, you're always welcome to message me or contact me via the Facebook page. And as I say with all these classes, just bring what you can. If you're thinking, I just can't, it's too much, it's just stressing me out and getting too anxious about coming to class, just come to class and watch. And you don't have to do everything in class. If you think, actually, this project isn't for me, but I'm quite happy to sit and watch and inspire me for a later time, go ahead and do that. So don't put yourself under pressure that you've got to sit there and twiddle wires for a whole hour and a half. Next time we meet, we will, it's about just learning a new technique. And sometimes it's good, isn't it, to expand your horizon and do something that's ever so slightly scary. So that was next week's class. Shall I show you what I've got for this week's class? I'm just going to move these bits and pieces out of the way. Now, if you watched last week's class, you'll see that I bought this lovely little, the gold dish that I had my nest on. I thought this would be so lovely for you to use. A little shallow dish. And I have actually got another shallow dish, a silver dish here, which I'm using with to put my equipment in today. But you can see in front of me that I've got a much deeper bowl. The reason for that is that my deeper bowl has got a pink pattern on it. And I've already explained that I've you know, had a bit of a fail on the yellow front with my daffodils, and I've gone for mainly pink flowers. And I decided that as I got lilies as part of my flower in the delivery I had at the weekend, that I just felt that the lilies were going to be quite tall, and if my bowl was too shallow, there wouldn't be enough, I wouldn't be able to get enough flower foam to hold my flowers steady. So I thought, why don't I just upscale everything, go for a slightly chunkier bowl, because my flowers are slightly larger, longer, visually heavier than what I had originally envisaged. So I've been thinking on my feet a little bit. So I have got a bowl here that's going to take flower foam. Now, those of you who are thinking of going foam free, what you could do at this point is to get your chicken wire, and I always recommend a chicken wire of quite a large gauge, that's the hole on it, about a 5 centimetre or 2 inch gauge on it. And what I would suggest you do here is perhaps cut a piece of chicken wire that is slightly larger than you think you're going to need. We always scrunch it up into a ball and flatten it a bit and put it in the container. But I think you want to have a little bit extra of the chicken wire, so that when you scrunch it, you're making the gaps in it slightly smaller. Because what we're going to do, instead of creating a flowing arrangement that chicken wire is just made for, a lovely flowing arrangement, because the aim of the game today is to come quite tall, vertical arrangement, you kind of want the flowers to stay upright. And if you've got a very large gauge hole in your wire, they're going to want to fall to one side. So that's going to be your challenge if you're going foam free today. If you're using chicken wire, that you might want to crunch it down a little bit so it's a little bit denser, the holes are a little bit smaller. But but of course not so small that you can't get your flowers through the holes. So I've got a turntable today because I thought that as this is going to be a tall arrangement face on, probably today I will just keep the camera angle as it is and then spin round. So I could either arrange looking into the mirror of my laptop, or I may well have to come and look at what's right for me and keep spinning it round to you. So in my little bowl of accessories here, my little toolkit, I've got a bread knife, which is what I use to cut up my flower foam. I also sometimes use an old table knife as well. The next thing is to think, how am I going to stop my foam rocking around inside my container? So if you've gone for more of a saucer dish shaped container, you've got two options. Do you want to have your flower foam below the height of the container, or do you want it to sit up a little bit? And I think you've got two options here, or two things to think about. If you've got a shallow dish and you want to keep your foam shallow so it doesn't rise above the height of your container, you're not going to have much depth. So if, like me, you've gone for tall flowers, they need to be anchored, they need to be solid within your flower foam in order that they don't wave around. So actually, you might want to keep your flower foam a little bit higher, just in order to get the depth, so that when you put your stems in, they are rock solid and steady. And if you are going a little bit higher with your flower foam, the way you would fix your flower foam in place would be to use your pot tape. So we've used pot tape before. I'm wishing now I'd found the start of my pot tape before I started filming, but you get the idea. You know what to do with this foam, and if you don't know what to do with it, you can message me or put a comment in. And I would say you're welcome to leave comments on the YouTube video afterwards, because the videos are unlisted. No one else other than those people that watch the video because they've paid for class can see. So really what I'm trying to say is no comment is too silly. So either on the video itself, or you can leave a comment on the Facebook page as well. So just, I'm going to have to get you to imagine I'm pulling my tape out, I'm fixing it to the side of my container. I've got my lump of flower foam. Let's use that box of test tubes. I've got my flower foam inside, which is raised above my container. I'm taking my tape up the side, pulling it across, and then sticking it down the other side. I'm sure that you are well used to doing that. If you decide that you want to keep your flower foam low in order to get the more streamlined look, and that's what I'm going to do in my very deep container, because my flower foam will disappear into my container. You just want to be sure that it's not going to move around. So how do you secure your flower foam when you can't use your tape? So what I'm going to be using today are these plastic, and I will say reusable, little flower frogs. So these are like little milking stools, four-legged little milking stools, and you use Florist Fix, which is like waterproof blue tack, and you fix that to the bottom of your disc and then put it into the bottom of the container. So I've already got some Florist Fix I've used for another project, which I've kept wrapped up to keep it sort of moist and pliable. So it's a bit like plasticine really. You want to mush it up a little bit, put it onto the bottom of your little flower frog. You just get that lumpy bit there. I'm actually going to use 2 flower frogs today because my piece of flower foam is going to be quite large. So don't think you have to fix it in one go. If you need 2 fixings, you go for 2 fixings. And then what you do here is making sure the inside of your bowl is dry, because this won't work if you've just freshly washed your bowl and the tackiness won't hold. I will need to do this downwards so I can get a bit of the pressure. So what I'm doing is pushing it down, and then I kind of twist it in place. I'm pushing it down and sort of down and push, and that holds like that. And then, you know, just to show you, my bulb is sufficiently dry that it's hanging on the container. So now I've got one end. Let's see if I can show you the other one. So I will need to push it in, and then just How far have I pushed it? From 12 o'clock to 1 o'clock, just a tiny grip. I don't know why I do that, I just feel it holds a little bit more. So it gives me lots of prong points, 2 points of contact where I can put in my flower foam. Now you've seen me soak flower foam many, many times before. I'm just getting a question here. How do you fix wire into a dish? Great question, great question. So if you've got your wire in your dish, I would say you need your tape. So imagine, now, interesting question. The easy option, more straightforward option, would be if your wire is mounded up into your container, you could use your pot tape to fix it in place the same way that you would your flower foam. And whenever you use tape, it only works, it's only successful if the mechanic that's holding in place is rising higher than the rim of your container. If I wanted to put a piece of tape across there and my flower foam or my wire was low down, it wouldn't do anything. I would just end up with a bowl with a piece of tape across it, and then my flower foam, my wire, would just be spinning round inside. So if you want to have your chicken wire below the height of your container, what you'll need to do is be a tiny bit ingenious and just wary as well of the fact that wire inside a container is scratchy. So you'll discover that when you're scrunching your wire down, that you may well end up with scratches on your hand, and depending on how precious your bowl is, you may end up scratching your bowl. But one thing you can do is with your wire, your chicken wire, is you can manipulate it around the bowl, around the rim of your container. Now I've got 2 handles on here. It may be that you could take your tape or a piece of string and sort of sew it through your chicken wire and then finish off around the handles. So it's a matter of, perhaps we can talk about this more in the Q&A when we go live afterwards, and I can have a look at your specific bowl. But there are ways and means. So you need to, it's keeping the old grey cells active. You need to work out, how can I do this so it's going to stay in place and be lovely and secure for my flowers? So I hope that helps, but we can talk about that later on. I'm getting a thumbs up there, so that seems to have hit the mark. And then I'm going to go into my flower foam. Now you have seen me soak flower foam so many times before that I've taken the opportunity of pre-soaking my foam. And normally what I do when I film is I try and soak my foam in a see-through container so you can see it soaking down over time. And this is what I normally soak my foam in. It's my spare washing up bowl that sits in my utility room. It's never used for washing dishes because, as you will have discovered if you soak flower foam, you end up with a residue in the bottom of the foam, and that doesn't sit well with other members of my household. So I have had this filled with water, I let it soak down, and then I have just had this sitting on my draining board for the past, I don't know, probably about half an hour or so. I'm just looking at the camera now. Can you see that the top is slightly paler, and gravity has meant that the water is sinking to the bottom. So although it's green on the top and is properly soaked, you can see that the water is pooling down towards the bottom of the container. And what I want you to do, look, it doesn't fit. So I just need to eye this up a little bit. I want to make sure, because I'm going for big flowers this time, that I want to sort of get a nice chunk of flower foam in the middle of my container. So I'm going to be quite, careful how much I cut off my foam. So as we know, the flower foam is divided up in 3, there's little guidelines here. So I'm going to use that to eye up how much foam I need, and I'm going to go halfway down that last little pocket of flower foam. And if I'd thought of this beforehand, I could have measured this up and only soaked what I need. So now I've got this waste of flower foam. So what I will be doing is wrapping this up in an old sandwich bag, trying to keep it watertight, and then next time I want to make a mini arrangement, I've got a piece of pre-soaked foam. Once the foam has dried out, the advice is not to use it again, although that's another discussion for another time. So I should be able to lift this up. It still doesn't fit. So what I'm going to do now is just chamfer the edges. I'm taking the corners of the edges of my foam You just get these little triangular wedges, and again I've done that quite small. I didn't want them to, it still won't fit. So what I'm going to do now is take off a little wedge at the bottom of each of the corners. So these pieces are just little bits like that. You don't want to go, oh, still not fitting. You don't want to take off too much at once. I'm going to do the whole thing again without talking you through it, because you don't want to suddenly discover that you've cut your foam so small it's no use for anything. I hope a success at last. We can breathe a sigh of relief. So that has gone in my foam. I'm not going to tip it right the way over, but it, you know, it is. If I took my fingers away, it wouldn't quite hold. But I don't imagine I'm ever going to tip my bowl over like that once I've actually made my arrangement. So it's impaled now on those prongs at the bottom where my I'd use the tack to hold my pin holders in place. So I'm going to get rid of these little bits of rubbish. I've now created a pool of water on the edge here, and we can finally start arranging. The mechanics are done. So what I'm going to do now is to bring my materials over and show you what I've got to use. I just need to make sure I've got my scissors to one side. So because we're making something quite tall, I've actually bought some pussy willow. So I know pussy willow is a favourite material of some members of our class. And I bought 2 bunches of pussy willow from the supermarket. I think they were £3 a bunch. And lo and behold, my husband yesterday cut down our dogwood bush. And he has done his own arrangement in the corner of the living room, which actually looks rather good, of just putting these dogwood stems in a vase. And I'm thinking, if I'd known you were going to cut that, I would have saved myself the £6, because my dogwood stems, they were red, they would have gone perfectly with my pink flowers and also the pink design on my dish. But I daren't now cut these dogwood stems or take any out of the vase, because you won't be very pleased with me. So, flowers, dogwood stems. Now, before you get too carried away with putting in your tallest stems, a word of warning. Your flower arrangement can only be as tall as the tallest flower in your bunch. So if you have literally taken my suggestions to heart and you've gone daffodil crazy, your daffodils are only going to be this big. So you will be making an arrangement that is considerably smaller than mine. It'll be beautiful and perfect. But what you don't want to do is to end up with daffodils in here and then decide you have got some tall materials that you want to sort of put your sticks up, because you're going to end up with an arrangement that's sort of colour here and then nothing at the top. So before you cut your stems, if like me you are using some stems for your base, you will need to measure them up a little bit. So let me bring over my tallest flowers. So I have got snapdragons and lilies. So I think I might actually go for snapdragon as my tallest. It's quite bushy, isn't it? And because I want my arrangement to look quite sort of lightweight, as if you could weave your way through it, I'm thinking a woodland forest. You know, when the bluebells are out and you've got all the trees going along. So I don't really want all this greenery on the side. So what I'm going to do is very carefully hold the flowers and pull off the greenery. Now I will say you need to be careful doing this, because sometimes when you're holding the stem you discover you snap the flower stems off, and you don't want to be damaging your stem. So if you find it easier or you're more confident, just go through and cut off the side shoots using your scissors. So that's going to be I know my flowers are going to be this big, and I'm going to get one of my twigs. I can afford to go a little bit higher, but I don't want to go too high. So I know that if I have my twigs about that height, so I've gone finger to thumb taller, and I can cut off the bottom. For me it's sort of 10 centimetres or so, and what I'm going to do is just stick it in my flower foam. So now I've cut that off, I can go through and cut them at a similar amount. So I'm taking off the little pussy willow tails. These stems are going to be quite handy as well because they'll eventually dry out. So I will get some wastage as the little pussy tails, the little rabbit's tails disappear. But sometimes they fall off through use, get knocked. I'm going to cut that one there. It's gone a bit kinky, but they will last, and you can, you know, take them out when the arrangement's gone over and just display them as you know, twigs in a vase. So I'm not being you know, particularly skillful in this bit. I've gone for 6. I'm just filling out the top surface there. So I have put in some structure to begin with to give me a guide as to where I'm going. So if I move that in front of my cupboard, it's exactly the same all the way round. And then I'm going to start putting my flowers in. So I am going to put my tallest flowers in first because I want to make sure they get in, and I want to make sure they are properly rooted or supported in the flower foam. And I don't want to be fiddling around if I've got too many small things in and then trying to wedge my taller flower in. So I'm going to work. I'm going to have to move that away a little bit. So recut the stem here. And at this point, you need to decide whether you're making an all-round arrangement or a front-facing arrangement. So I have got these 2 handles on my side. I'm going to make a front-facing arrangement, and as I put my flowers in, I'm going to put them in so I can see them, and then I'll spin it round to you. So I'm going to go in the back, like that. I'm not quite sure you can see that. I'm going to bring my flowers over so I can down and get them. I've got 3 of these snapdragons, and I'm not going to put them in at the same height. I'm going to vary the height slightly because I want to have the colour from the top to the bottom, and that is why I've started with my tallest flower first. If you start with your shortest flower, and you know, I wanted this quite low, you just run the risk you're kind of going to run out of space, if that makes sense. You may find you actually wanted your last flower to be taller than it is. That's why I'm going tallest through to shortest, because I can't add any height onto that tallest flower. So the flower heads are about this big. What I'm going to do is I'm going to hold my flower up and think I just need a little bit of gap. So you see each of the flower heads as an individual entity. It's not just one long line of the pink. So I'm holding it up, I'm having a look, and then I'm thinking this is actually resting on my tabletop, and I only want it to go into the foam a couple of centimetres, so probably I need to cut off this amount. So I don't guess each time, I'm eyeing it up and having a look. So I've got one coming on this side, like that, and then the other one, again taking off. Oh, this one's got a bit of a droop to it. Hopefully that'll revive. So fortunately I'm going to put this one down a bit lower so I can just get away with saying it's you know, a little bit of movement off to the side, and hopefully being shorter the water's going to shoot straight up to it and it won't let me down. So that's going a little bit short as well. Some of these little floret heads, I just think they're going over a little bit, so I want the arrangement to look as good as it possibly can. So anything that just looks like it might go in its last legs, it's just going to get pinched out. And that is something I'll continue to do during the life of my flowers. So I've got 3 pieces in. I can see that one there is shooting away. You can barely see that one at the top, but 1, 2, 3. So they are in, my sort of anchor pieces are in. I'm then going to come in with my lilies, which are rather gorgeous, very luxurious looking. Can you see I've left the pollen on, and the only reason for that was so I can show you how to take it off. So I just use my fingers. If you don't like the pollen staining your fingers, you could get a piece of kitchen towel, kitchen paper, and sort of clamp your hand over the centre of the flower and then pull everything off. So I'm ending up with these little, they've gone slightly powdery, and I've just got a small amount of powder onto my fingers. my lilies are quite dark, so if I had accidentally spilt some of the pollen, it wouldn't really have shown up. But if you've got, if you're using lilies in there, a white or a yellow, it's going to show up if you do spill any pollen. And what you can do if you've got a pipe cleaner is just sort of dust with your pipe cleaner, and that will take up the pollen. So this is a very large flower head. Yes, it's a tall flower, but if I have my flower head at the top, it's going to make my arrangement look very top heavy. Now this is the problem with lilies, is because of course they open up over time. So it may well be that in order to keep my arrangement looking in balance and proportion, as my lilies open up, I might be getting my scissors and just snipping off the heads, because in design terms, they've altered the balance of my arrangement. So as this one is already open, I'm going to put it down quite low, so when you're looking at the arrangement, it becomes my focal flower and your eye lands on that and then starts to zigzag up through the arrangement. So again, I've got this down, it's falling down next to my knees, so I can hold it up, and I'm thinking the top of the foam's there, it needs to go in a couple of centimetres. I reckon that I can cut my stem there. I'm going to take off that lower leaf and then have that, and I'm putting everything in more or less vertically. This is a column arrangement. So if you're used to making very traditional flower arrangements, everything radiates out from the middle, and you're sort of wanting to go out like this, just tip it back. But ultimately, if you want to do something a little bit more traditional, you go ahead and do it. So you can see that that's landed in there, and I'm thinking, is that low enough? I want it a little bit lower. I'm going to go really bold there and cut off that. I'm not going to go into the same hole, because once you've pushed a hole into your flower foam, it makes a little tunnel. And if I push a shorter stem into that same hole, it's going to be sitting in a little air pocket, and it's not, the flower stem isn't going to be in contact with the flower foam, and it's not going to be taking up water. So sometimes if you find you've got a stray flower in your arrangement that's just died, that might be the reason. Did you put it in once, cut it down, and then put it back in the same hole? So I've got my little hole here, and I'm just going to move my flower. It's right next door, it's 3 millimeters away, and then put my flower in, and that looks much better. It's lower, it's sort of locking in, and then you're sort of guiding me as to where to put my next flower. So all the time, it's like you're the artist. You've got your paintbrush here, and you're looking, and you're looking at where your gaps are. And for me, I want a bit of colour here and probably a bit of colour there. So I've got 1, 2, 3 with my snapdragons, and then I'm filling in the gaps. If only I had some more hands, I'm going to go 1, 2, 3 with my lilies. But I don't have 3 lilies, I only have 2 lilies. So this is a perfect lily to go in the top part of the arrangement, because they're not open yet. And I will be doing everything to keep my fingers crossed that they don't open, or that they open really slowly. Because as I say, it's going to affect the balance of my arrangement. Here, I'm going to take off the leaves, because I don't want my arrangement to be all leaf. I want it to have this airiness through it. And again, that's because I've decided that's the look of my arrangement. If you want something that's more solid and fills out, you go ahead and keep your leaves on. But I want to just lighten everything up a little bit. So I'm going to pull these leaves off. And that sort of reveals the flowers themselves. Sometimes I don't take all the leaves off. Just, you want your flowers still to look natural, so I might leave a couple on. And if I decide when I finish, actually I don't like those, I can just go back in and trim them out. So before I recut my stem, I'm holding my flower up. That's where I want it to go. And I'm cutting. And I will do exactly what I did before. If I haven't cut enough off, I can either decide to cut more off before I put my flower into my foam, or I can take it out and cut more off. But I think, by Jove, I've done it perfectly. So that is now nestled in there, like so. And round the back, you can see the flowers, but it is quite clearly with that open lily on that side. That is the front of the arrangement. So we're getting in some nice structure here. Now, we did talk about wanting to have yellow and St David's Day and daffodils and Pancakes Day and lemons. So I've pushed the boat out, and I've actually bought myself some yellow roses from the supermarket, because I have got some daffodils I'm going to put lower down. but my daffodils are really short. So I didn't want yellow at the bottom and pink at the top. So I wanted to get some height into my arrangement. So if I'd had yellow lilies, this would have been perfect. But I haven't got yellow lilies, but I have found some supermarket roses, which I think are going to do the job. Oops. Trying to be delicate with them. So they're going to give me a little bit of height. So again, what I'm going to do is making sure there's no thorns on this before I do this. There are no thorns. It's painful if you do that when there are thorns. I'm just going to leave one flower on top. I'm going to try and get my highest flower in as long as possible. There'll just be a minuscule amount that I'm cutting off at the end. And although it's the front facing arrangement, I'm going to put this rose to the back because I want to be able to see through my arrangement. It needs to have a bit of 3D quality. So you can see that quite clear at the back, but actually I can barely see it at the front here. And then I'm going to bring my roses through, my yellowness through. And did you notice that I haven't put any greenery in the arrangement? I haven't tried to cover up my flower foam. That's because I'm using loads and loads of flowers this time. And what I'm going to do is either use some of my moss to put over my flower foam right at the end. I should have measured that before I tried to put that in. It'll just, or just a minimal amount of greenery. Just getting that to sit where I want it to sit. So just starting to see that yellow coming down. So that yellow there, I can go really short. I have got some daffodils, as I say, but I don't want it to look like an arrangement of two halves. You know, daffodils here, roses up above. But I have got quite a lot of these roses, so I might as well be a little bit more exuberant with them. And I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Just wondering whether I could get another one at the back there. So I don't mind about whether I'm working in odds and evens. You may well find that if you've been to a flower class, you get told that you have to have odd numbers of flowers. Because I'm doing a more modern style arrangement, I am not being too precious about my numbers. I just want to make sure that I get the look. So shall we have a go with my daffodils? Let me show you my daffodils. So these cost me £1 a bunch, which I think is quite a common price. All the supermarkets seem to be selling them at that. You can cut away the elastic bands, but I do have a drawer where I keep my elastic bands. And I bought these on Saturday. I kept them out of water on Saturday, on Sunday, on Monday, and this morning I recut the stems and put them in my bucket. That was because I wanted to hold them. So you can be quite cruel to daffodils. That you probably notice when you buy them, they are just put in crates and they're not in water. And I didn't want them to be over too soon. So what you can see here in the opening is how far they've opened since I put them in water at 8 o'clock this morning. So that's 4 hours of water. Because if you arrange them when they're really in bud, when you first buy them, they don't look like anything. It's just like you can have loads of pencils in your arrangement. They will open up over time. But because I wanted to sort of show some immediate you know, create a wow effect for you, I did need to put them in water. So I'm going to take out the ones that are slightly more opened and make a feature of those first of all. Now you're going to say to me, Julie, we've heard that when you use daffodils and cut them, this milky latex sap comes out which can shorten the life of your flowers. Yes, you're quite right. Julie, we've heard that spring flowers don't like being in flower foam. You're quite right. But sometimes you just want to use a flower because it talks to you, so I'm going to break the rules. Now the reason that a lot of the spring flowers don't like being in flower foam is because they're soft stemmed, and in order to get your flowers into the foam, you have to hold your flower and you have to push it through this you know, quite thick substance. So you might find your stems crack a little bit. And with the daffodils, they're actually hollow stemmed and they've got this ridge on the side. And it's just like a weakness point in it. So when I come to put my daffodils in my arrangement, I could just try, I can hear it squeezing there. You could just sort of wing it and hope it holds in place. But I've put that daffodil into my flower foam about 1/2 centimetre, and it's quite likely if I move the arrangement that the stems are going to fall over. So there are a few ways and means around this. And this flower here, the daffodils, you've heard me many times saying cut your flowers at an angle because that helps water uptake, but also sort of gives a dart, a pointed arrow that you can push into your flower foam. I am cutting my daffodils straight across. Absolute no-no, eh? But the reason for that is I'm not going to go overboard trying to push my daffodils into my flower foam because I know they are going to break easily. But as long as my daffodils are in contact with my water source, in contact with my foam, they will continue to take up water. But it's just, how are you going to get something to be in contact with the foam but not have that root, that extra stem that goes down at the bottom? So you've got two options here. One, you could use a kebab stick or possibly even a cocktail stick, and I can slide that right, I can slide it right inside. So the whole cocktail stick has gone up inside my, my daffodil. And when I push the cocktail stick in, I just need to make sure, just looking at my flower there, that it's actually gone in and it's sitting there in touching the foam. Another option is to use a drinking straw. So I was going to use, this is actually a paper drinking straw. I'm certain I had some plastic ones somewhere, but we're trying to be less reliant on plastic. Sometimes you'll see people putting the drinking straw up into the flower foam, but it won't go very far because the drinking straw is thicker. So what you're creating is just like a little plug. So that's, a couple of centimetres. You've got a little plug there at the end, and you could do the same thing with your daffodils and push them in. I would say that having done the two with the paper straw, it's not very, hasn't got much substance to it. After the two, I was more confident using the kebab stick. So this is a trick that you might want to use for other hollow stemmed flowers. Don't be afraid if you want to cut the end a little bit off. Delphiniums in the summertime, I need a bit of yellow right in the middle there. And then because we don't want everything at the same height, I've kind of put 3 in the same position. You want to vary the height. And just remember that as your daffodils mature, they start off pencil thin, but when they come out, they bend over, so they will turn to look at you. So you just need to fetch that in. So I'm going to cut this one a bit shorter and then put my stick in, cut that down, and then start to add them in. And you can add in as many as you like, and that is why I have put my yellow roses in, because I wanted that yellow sensation to travel all the way up through my arrangement. So you'll see the daffodils, and then I'm hoping that mentally I can just persuade you that my very tall roses are actually daffodils as well. And then you continue on. So I will spend a little bit more time when we're making and creating together, seeing how many of my daffodils I can actually get in here. So let me talk to you about the other flowers I've got. I have got some hypericum berries. I might use the hypericum berries really short and use them as my underplanting on the top surface, and that will pick up on the colour of my lilies. Or I might put in, the same thing, start with one tall and one middle size and one low one as well. So that is something I will add in afterwards. And I have got some greenery, which came in the bundle I got from my Freddy's Flower delivery, the Eucalyptus parvifolia, but I'm not putting it in upright like that. My preference is, if I use it at all, it'll be in very short sprigs down the bottom. But what I'm really hoping to do is to put a top dressing of my moss on here, so that it really does become, although I've used a very traditional vintage looking container, I want that modern streamlined look. So the only other thing I was going to add in, and I'm just going to bring that to the front, is say you didn't want to use daffodils but you wanted tulips. Now tulips are a pain as well. Spring flowers are beautiful, but they're a pain. So I bought these daffodils, oh, when did I buy them? Possibly last Wednesday, so it's nearly a week ago now. They have grown a little bit. And have you noticed that my daffodils haven't gone all wayward? That's because I have constrained them in a very tall vase. So I'm saying to them, you cannot move, I want you to stay straight. But what will happen, as soon as I put these flowers into my arrangement, they will wobble and move with the light. But if you wanted to add tulips, again, I would say take off the leaves, peel them back. I might keep the top leaf on. And what you might need to do is to take a bit of your paper covered wire or something. I'm just going to spin this around so I can see it, and lash your tulip onto something else to hold it in place. So can you see it wants to, it's become top heavy. It's a really light flower, but it's a little bit top heavy. So I'm just going to take some of my paper covered wire out of my box here. And very gently, because you don't want to, they're soft stem flowers, you don't want to decapitate them. So I'm going to cut that wire, paper covered wire. I'm going to wrap the wire around my pussy willow. So it's got two prongs hanging out, and then going to put my tulip stem into the prong and then twist tie the ends together. So that becomes a really sort of subtle way of tying in, much as if you were a gardener and you were tying in some of your flowers. So that would be a really nice way of getting tulips into your arrangement. And they will continue to grow a little bit, and they will continue to grow towards the light. So if you do want tulips in there, you're going to have to constantly be turning your arrangement round in order that you get, the light moves around your arrangement in the same way. But sometimes these things are just beautiful. If you're using tulips and they go wayward, well, just embrace it, because that's all part of the springtime season. So I am going to leave it there for the moment. If I see if I can place that back down, I'll get rid of my turntable. Hopefully that brings it down a little bit lower so you can see. I will perhaps see if I can overlay a video of this so you can sort of see it without my toaster and my oven hob in the background distracting you. I'm looking at my lily here. Oops. This was the daffodil and the straw. So that's why I favour the kebab method. I'm still wondering whether that could be a tiny bit lower. But as I am going to dress up the top surface with my moss, I'm hoping that might give it a little bit more of protection. I just feel there's a bit of a gap. It's too high here, but I can fiddle with that later on. So what I'm going to do then is I'm going to switch off the recorded section now. So I shall say goodbye to those of you who are watching on the recorded video, and those of you who are able, who are watching live, do stay on for the Q&A afterwards. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what containers you've got with you and what flowers that you've used as well, and whether you've gone daffodils or whether you, like me, you've gone for something totally different.